the recent release of the Epilogue, I present to you for the final time references and symbolism within TGIF. Coward. This is the way she initially manipulated Macbeth into killing Duncan, by calling him a coward if he didn't.
Welcome home, my dear lady.
Ironic parallel to the scene in part 1 where Jen is first introduced to Macduff's castle. Ironically enough, the composition of the illustration is identical, and that was not intentional. Another thing you first notice is the change in attire. This isn't a case of me getting sick of drawing the same thing over and over again, like in part 2 when I changed Jenny's hairstyle. The Celtic plaits are beautiful, but they are just a pain to draw sometimes. So I wanted to change it up. The attire in the epilogue is inspired from ancient Greece. Obviously Macbeth is decked in mostly darker grey, while Jen is decked in mostly lighter grey, sort of similar to like yin-yangs and sort of like how there is bad and good, but there's also good and bad. Obviously applicable with these characters knowing their past. Yes, Jen, I know you have OCD, so I tidied up the skulls for you. The scar on Macbeth's neck is representative of his cause of death, being beheaded. I imagine if Jen didn't survive the jump from the battlement, she would have one somewhere on her leg. And from now on, I'm going to refer to her as Jen, because I don't know how to pronounce her real name. Every source says something different, and there is no point calling her Lady Macbeth because it doesn't make sense. Appearing to me once again like the ghost of Caesar. Another unintentional reference to Greek history / mythology. We all know the story. Julius Caesar appears to Brutus, symbolising his guilt, but also to foreshadow his death in the battle. If Macbeth is Caesar, does that make Jen Brutus? Mark Antony? Calpurnia, maybe?
Yet you displayed such avarice qualities.
The screaming was obviously acting, but the coughing was real. It does sound like the fakest part, but it's that fake cough that you do whenever you, like, overdo something. Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. Final Julius Caesar reference. This is a quote from Shakespeare's play. I think it's said by Mark Antony, which basically means shout, go crazy, and go violent. You wanted to frame me.
I had no part in that.
Originally, in the first draft of the script, it was him behind the collapsation of the ceiling.
Hadn't you and Malcolm not agreed that it's better to be ignorant in order to be protected from something that would destroy your happiness forever?
They did say that. That was the rule. Reference to ignorance is bliss.
Sometimes kindred are more malicious than meets the eye.
Okay, in regards to who collapsed the ceiling, and if you couldn't figure it out already by this flashback, in part 1, obviously there's no suspicion, but from part 2 onwards, there's a lot of suspicion surrounding him. Some people were close to figuring out with the guess of the witches. The witches helped, but Dawn. Remember the witch's poem and relate it back to Dawn. It all comes together now.
This isn't a lucid dream.
Lucid dreaming is when you're aware that you're dreaming and then you can control it. She is aware that she's dreaming, but she can't control it, so it isn't lucid yet.
Are two pieces of the same pie.
You're right! After mishearing 2 peas in the same pod as 2 pieces of the same pie, and now it's just been a thing since then. Although it may look like it, Macbeth is not heating the chain, he is just tightening it. He would not stoop that low as to heat the chain. The colour of his aura is just a dark red, which can be seen as like a comforting colour, but can also be seen as like danger and blood, obviously. Oh, Curly's wife is evil because she has red nail polish. Oh, good God. The colour of Jenny's aura is actually a dark, bright green, which has similar meaning to the dark red.
A heart that is now too weak to cope with the guilt of murder.
Deja vu from part 1 with the way murder was pronounced.
Who could ever grow to forgive a murderer?
I realise that. This guilt hurts more than childbirth. More than kidney stones. Originally, instead of kidney stones, the line was more than a burn to the skin, because apparently being burnt alive is the most excruciating pain a human can experience. But obviously, a tiny burn to the skin compared to being burnt alive is not really that comparable, so... Hi, Scoop. So I did end up changing it to kidney stones, which is apparently comparable to the pain of childbirth. I was careful on the order of which I put them in, because I didn't want it to make it seem like one was more painful than the other. As someone who's experienced neither, touch wood, I don't really have much say in it. Depending on how prepared you are in regards to giving birth and how big the kidney stone is, that can be an indicating factor of which one will be more painful. I decided to put childbirth first before kidney stones because then the way it's based on how it's worded, the addition of kidney stones is putting it in context that Macbeth can understand. Maybe this whole epilogue is just a PSA to stay hydrated and not get kidney stones?
I have only been trying to free you from this pain so that you don't have to suffer.
Yet he purposefully attacked her with metal 2 seconds ago in order to satisfy his anger.
Remember that I was long gone before he decided to take you in like you were a stray cat.
Cat imagery again to relate to Jenny.
Marry his mistress.
I can't be his mistress if his wife is dead! When I was writing that line on the script, I imagined it to be more comedic, but when I was actually performing it, I made it have a more emotional tone. Remember, Jen feels very guilty about Cassiopeia's death. Like, very guilty. What's it like in Tartarus?
Who said either of us were going to Tartarus?
Who said either of us were pronouncing Tartarus correctly? Tartarus. Tartar sauce.
I would have given you that divine knowledge many moons ago.
Unless he is physically unable to tell her what happens in the afterlife, due to some divine force pushing him against it, there is some goodness within this gentleman. Little disclaimer, I don't believe in heaven or hell. I am not a Christian, I wasn't born into any religion, I'm not really an atheist either, I like to consider myself agnostic, but if you couldn't tell, based off the stories I put out and the things I write, I am a strong believer in reincarnation. Consider if that has any impact on how you interpret the story of TGIF.
And you see me as the callous demon, and yourself as the angel.
No, that's just how Marzipan Studios likes to romanticize it.
At this point, flattering your vanity.
I'm far from the Good Samaritan I yearn to be. Biblical reference to the story of the Good Samaritan, which tells about unconditional love and showing kindness to everyone, even your enemies.
You do have far to go now, don't you, Jezebel?
Another biblical ref. Jezebel basically manipulated her husband, the king of Israel, to kill people, and she literally ordered death upon anyone who opposed her. Lady Macbeth vibes much. Ironically enough, the name Jenny kind of resembles Jezebel a little bit. Also, if anyone remembers the music I used in the second trailer for part 1, Jerry was there. More like Jenny was there. Yeah, I still don't know who Jerry is. I learned that I'd never be able to change your views when I try to persuade supernatural beings assumed as witches to use their magic for good. Reference to part 1, where she's literally begging, in the lyrics of Maneskin, for the witches to use their magic for good, in hopes to bring Duncan back to life.
Of a mentally unstable 21-year-old.
He does have a point though. If Malcolm wasn't young and easy to take advantage of, then perhaps she wouldn't have gotten away with as much as she did. Malcolm also confirmed as 21 years old in TGIF. To put it into perspective, Fleance is the youngest at about 10, Don is 18, Lucille is 17, Duncan is around about late 50s, mid 60s, and the rest of the characters are round about early to mid 30s. Jenny is 34. There's a lot of speculation going around whether Macbeth is older than Lady Macbeth or who's older. A lot of other people envision Macbeth and Lady Macbeth as the Capricorn-Scorpio duo respectively, and as a Capricorn I can definitely see that. Macbeth is very ambitious. Also note, Capricorns and Scorpios are prone to sexual tension between one another, which is definitely there. I'd imagine Macbeth to be 34 as well, round about 2 months younger than Jen. The real King Macbeth was 35 when he became king, so I wanted to keep the ages relatively consistent, although not everything is really that consistent with the actual historical Macbeth. The original play isn't really that consistent with history either.
Sleep no more, my lady.
Sleep no more is an obvious quote from the original play, referring to guilt causing insomnia and sleepwalking. Also notice the shift from part 1, from Macbeth referring to Jen as my queen to just my lady, which really shows the decrease in value he sees in her at this point in time. Is she really Macbeth's prisoner, or are they both prisoners?
Not everyone will be willing to forgive you.
Again, Macbeth really does have a point. Forgiveness cannot be forced. Although, forgiveness is better than vengeance, but forgiveness cannot be forced. Which is another point I'm trying to get across with this audio drama. Maybe Macbeth isn't the villain after all. Who's the true villain of TGIF? It's guilt. In comparison to part 1, it's less black and white as of who is the protagonist and who is the antagonist. Obviously in part 1, it's like Jenny's good and Macbeth's evil, but it's not that black and white as that, as the epilogue unveils. It's like Frankenstein. Is Victor the good guy or is the creature the good guy? In my opinion, they both do pretty bad things, but there's good in everyone, there's bad in everyone. Change the dungeons to glaciers and you literally get the mountain scene from Frankenstein, where Jenny is Victor and Macbeth is the creature. Note how Victor invents the creature. Lady Macbeth invents Macbeth's tyrannous side. Frankenstein the modern Prometheus? No, Frankenstein the modern Macbeth.
And don't come lamenting to me when you get punished for things you do.
You can guarantee that she won't come lamenting to Macbeth, and instead it'll either be Camille or Malcolm, because they're the ones carrying all of her problems at this point in time. Also, I love the sassiness within Macbeth's voice during this line. It's very alarming that he says when you get punished, not if you get punished. Now you truly look like the innocent flower, but are the serpent under it? Dark humour. A reference to my favourite quote from the original play. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. Cherry blossom imagery once more to convey springtime and new beginnings. One other thing to add to this idea of Macbeth literally being the serpent under it is that if you listen closely to some of his lines over the course of the epilogue, he kind of sounds like he's hissing a little bit, particularly during the lines where he's really pissed off.
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Biblical reference to the Old Testament in regards to dealing with punishment and retaliation. Originally, in the first draft of this script, Jenny would reply with, "Turn the other cheek," which is the New Testament's way of dealing with punishment and retaliation. But then I remembered that Jenny isn't really a follower of the Bible or the scriptures anymore. So instead, she replies with this: "An eye for a tooth," which, in short, is the entirety of TGIF in a nutshell. Trying to make up for something, but it's not quite there, but it doesn't quite work. Anyone else notice the change in Jenny's voice compared to when she talks to other characters compared to when she talks to Macbeth? With other characters, she's more light-hearted, like, "Anything for you, my lord." But when she's with Macbeth, it's always, "You blocked me on Facebook, and now you're going to die," sort of vibes. Anyone else notice the difference in Macbeth's appearance compared to his initial appearance in part 1? This is to reference how this is a dream, or if it's not a dream, at least some oblivion dimension that is in between realities of the living and the dead, where they can coexist together and not clash. Now, you may be wondering, why hasn't Duncan made an appearance in TGIF yet? You'd think that he would appear as a ghost, similar to Macbeth or Banquo. The truth is, Bearing in mind the impact that the appearance of Macbeth's ghost has on Jenny, imagine that intense grief and guilt pushed to the limit upon her seeing the man she killed. Duncan knows she just wouldn't be able to bear it. Neither Duncan or Banquo interfere with Jenny's dream with Macbeth because they both know that Jenny and Macbeth need to have these final moments together and end their conflict once and for all. At this point, it's all up to speculation whether you want to perceive the epilogue as being a dream or the afterlife. Jen and Macbeth can just be away from society and not cause any more harm, but also be happy in a way. My only intention for the epilogue was for it to be some sort of closure on Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's conflict, and also to tie up some loose ends that were left from part 2. Everything else is completely ambiguous and up to interpretation. Jenny believes it to be a dream, but is it really? Jokes aside, my whole intention for TGIF was to lift the darkness that the original play sort of left off on. I had an idea for a sequel, and I wanted to bring it out into the world. Obviously, underlying themes such as socialism, feminism, equality between religions is another thing, or equality between religions and lack of religion. LGBT solidarity as well. For example, Jenny is bisexual, Macbeth is pansexual, Malcolm is pansexual. With that, I know this references video has been longer than the actual epilogue itself, but thank you for listening, and I will be ending it right here.